The structural layout of the Vanguard Regional Commercial Lending Branch was deliberately designed to project an illusion of absolute, unyielding transparency. The architecture relied heavily on floor-to-ceiling glass walls, open-plan workstations, and unobstructed sightlines. It was a calculated aesthetic choice meant to assure corporate clients that their capital was secure. As a senior cybersecurity architect who had spent the last decade penetrating corporate firewalls for institutional clients, I understood that transparency in physical architecture rarely equated to transparency in digital ledgers. I sat in a stiff, ergonomic waiting chair in the main lobby, a heavy leather briefcase resting squarely between my boots. I was not here to conduct an authorized penetration test. I was here as a civilian attempting to secure a $250,000 commercial bridge loan to purchase a massive array of physical servers for my newly established, independent cybersecurity firm. The ambient temperature of the room was set to a precise, heavily regulated 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The digital hum of the ATM servers in the adjacent wall registered at exactly 40 decibels. The environment was stable and entirely predictable. "Mr. Martinez," a voice cut through the low murmur of the lobby. I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my dark charcoal suit. The woman standing at the threshold of glass office number 3 was Margot Gutierrez. She was 38, wearing a sharply tailored navy blazer over a crisp white blouse. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, practical knot at the nape of her neck. She held a thick manila folder containing my preliminary application. I had observed her for 20 minutes while waiting. She was highly efficient. She processed data rapidly, her keystrokes precise, her posture rigidly professional. Yet, there was a distinct, underlying tension in her shoulders. She operated with the hypervigilance of a subject, navigating a continuous threat environment. "I am Xavier Martinez," I confirmed, stepping forward. "Please, come in," Margot said, her voice a perfectly modulated, professional cadence. She stepped aside, allowing me to enter the glass-walled office. I walked in and took the seat opposite her mahogany desk. She closed the door, sealing us in acoustic privacy, and sat down. She opened the manila folder, aligning the edges of the paper with the edge of her desk, a micro-action, indicating a need for control over her immediate environment. "I have reviewed your business plan, your projected revenue models, and your personal credit history," Margot began, her eyes scanning the top sheet. "The collateral you have offered your existing proprietary software patents more than covers the risk profile for the bridge loan. According to the bank's primary algorithmic underwriting system, this application should be an immediate, automated approval. Then we can proceed to the disbursement phase," I observed, my tone entirely flat and factual. Margot hesitated. Her eyes darted briefly upward, looking through the glass wall of her office toward the larger corner suite at the end of the hall. The micro-expression of anxiety was undeniable. "The system requires a secondary manual authorization from the senior branch manager for all loans exceeding $200,000 for first-time business accounts. He is currently reviewing the file." Before I could request a timeline on the secondary review, the heavy glass door to the office swung open without a preliminary knock. The man who entered wore a bespoke suit and a smile that lacked any genuine warmth. He was Richard Vance, the senior branch manager. I recognized the archetype instantly. He was a man who utilized administrative authority to compensate for a severe lack of actual, measurable competence. "Margot," Vance said, his tone dripping with a weaponized, patronizing patience. He did not look at me. He walked around the desk and stood entirely too close to her chair, invading her physical perimeter. "I see you are attempting to process the Martinez file." Margot stiffened, her spine locking into a rigid, defensive line. She leaned slightly away from him. "The algorithmic score is exceptional, Mr. Vance. The collateral is verified. I was about to route it for your final signature. I ran a secondary risk assessment." Vance countered smoothly, dropping a single, red-stamped sheet of paper onto her perfectly aligned desk. "The cybersecurity sector is highly volatile. The applicant has zero history of managing a physical server farm. The bank's risk tolerance parameters cannot accommodate this extension of capital. The application is denied." Margot stared at the red stamp, her jaw clenching. "Mr. Vance, the algorithms account for sector volatility. Denying this loan contradicts our operational guidelines." "I dictate the operational guidelines in this branch," Vance murmured, his voice dropping to a low, slick register that communicated absolute, asymmetric leverage. He finally turned to look at me. The predatory calculation in his eyes was blatant, heavily masked by financial legalese. "It is unfortunate, Mr. Martinez," Vance said, leaning his hip against Margot's desk. "Standard channels are often restrictive for visionary entrepreneurs. We are bound by strict underwriting covenants. However, I am a proponent of local business. There are other ways to improve your credit standing and mitigate the bank's exposure." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick, embossed business card, and slid it across the desk toward me. "I sit on the advisory board of an independent commercial consulting firm," Vance continued, his voice slick and practiced. "Apex Solutions. We specialize in alternative risk restructuring. If you were to engage Apex for a standard consulting retainer, say, a 10% risk mitigation premium on your requested loan amount, paid prior to disbursement, I could attach their letter of collateralization to your file. With their specialized backing, I could utilize my discretionary override authority to approve your capital today." The sentence was a masterpiece of corporate evasion. It was not a subtle suggestion. It was a mathematically precise formulation of felony extortion. He had identified a critical vulnerability in my capital requirements and was weaponizing his administrative authority to demand a $25,000 illicit kickback under the guise of a consulting fee. I did not gasp. I did not engage in a loud moralistic argument. I rely on tactical procedure, not emotion. I looked at the business card. I did not touch it. I shifted my gaze to Margot. Her face was entirely drained of color. She was staring at her hands, completely silenced by the blatant corruption occurring in her office. She was a hostage to her own hierarchy. The parameters of a commercial credit extension are governed entirely by the Federal Reserve's underwriting standards and internal algorithmic models. "Mr. Vance," I stated, my voice a deep, flat rumble that immediately seized control of the acoustic space. "They are not governed by localized consulting fees to unverified third-party shell companies." Vance's smile vanished, replaced by the sharp, defensive anger of a man whose operating procedure had just been unexpectedly challenged. "You clearly do not understand the complexities of commercial risk management," Vance snapped, standing up straight, attempting to regain his physical height advantage. "This conversation is over. Your application is definitively denied. Furthermore, due to the aggressive and high-risk nature of your business profile, I am placing a temporary administrative freeze on your existing checking accounts, with this institution pending a standard fraud review." He was attempting a punitive escalation. If I didn't pay the bribe, he would cripple my current operational liquidity using bank policy as a weapon. "Your operational methods represent a critical systemic vulnerability," I stated coldly. I reached down, picked up my heavy leather briefcase, and stood up. I utilized my own physical height to establish absolute perimeter dominance. "I am withdrawing the application." I turned to Margot. "Miss Gutierrez, thank you for your efficient processing of the preliminary data." I walked out of the glass office, leaving the embossed business card untouched on the mahogany desk. I crossed the lobby, pushed through the revolving doors, and stepped out into the harsh daylight of the city. I did not walk to my vehicle. I stood near the edge of the sidewalk, pulling my encrypted mobile device from my pocket. I needed to reroute my existing capital to secondary offshore accounts before Vance's administrative freeze propagated through the banking network. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the bank pushed open. Margot walked out. She did not have her blazer on. She looked around the crowded sidewalk, her eyes locking onto me. She walked rapidly in my direction, stopping exactly 3 feet away, maintaining a strict professional boundary. Her breathing was noticeably elevated. "Mr. Martinez?" she said, her voice tight, vibrating with a mixture of profound frustration and lingering adrenaline. "The application is withdrawn," I reminded her, keeping my phone in my hand, observing the local traffic patterns. "I know," she whispered, glancing nervously back toward the bank's expansive windows. "I followed you out here because I needed to tell you to pull your capital immediately." Vance wasn't bluffing. He executed the freeze order on your checking accounts 3 minutes after you left the room. My liquid assets were entirely transferred to an external, unassailable network routing node exactly 4 minutes ago, I replied, showing her the confirmation screen on my device. "The bank has frozen an empty digital ledger." Margot blinked, staring at the screen. The sheer speed of my logistical countermeasure temporarily short-circuited her panic. You drained the accounts from the sidewalk?" "I am a cybersecurity architect. I do not leave capital exposed to hostile actors," I stated. I locked the screen and slid the phone into my pocket. I observed her closely. Her hands were trembling slightly. You risked a severe disciplinary infraction by leaving the branch to warn a client. Why? Margot crossed her arms tightly over her chest, a defensive posture against the cold reality of her situation. Because it is wrong. What he did in there, what he does to dozens of small business owners, it is completely unethical. If his methodology is a known operational pattern, why hasn't it been reported to the Corporate Compliance Board? I asked, analyzing the systemic failure. She let out a harsh, dry laugh, looking down at the concrete. Because he holds all the leverage. A year ago, I processed a loan for a local contractor. Vance quietly altered the income verification documents after I signed off on them, making it look like I deliberately approved a fraudulent file. He kept the digital logs. He told me that if I ever blew the whistle on his consulting firm, he would submit those logs to the Federal Reserve. He would have my banking license permanently revoked. I would face federal charges. I'm trapped. I processed the variables. Vance had engineered a manufactured default condition to hold her career hostage, forcing her to act as a silent witness to his extortion ring. He is utilizing a fabricated digital chain of custody, I concluded. He owns the system. Xavier, she said, her voice cracking with exhaustion. She looked up at me, the vulnerability entirely exposed. I'm sorry about your loan. You have a brilliant business model. You just walked into the wrong bank. She turned to walk back toward the suffocating glass architecture. Miss Gutierrez, I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register that halted her movement entirely. She looked back over her shoulder. I do not accept failure based on corrupt administrative bottlenecks, I stated, my mind rapidly compiling a counteroffensive architecture. Vance believes he is untouchable because he controls the internal bank network, but he operates an external LLC to collect the bribes. That is an external node. External nodes have vulnerabilities. Margot turned fully around, her brow furrowing. What are you saying? I am saying that I require the exact legal spelling of the consulting firm on the business card he provided, I said, my eyes locking onto hers with absolute, unyielding certainty. I am going to permanently dismantle his leverage. Xavier, you can't, she protested, her protective instincts immediately flaring. He will flag your social security number across every commercial lending network in the state using the fraud prevention system. You will never secure a business loan again. I am a digital ghost, I corrected smoothly, adjusting my grip on my briefcase. Margot stared at me. She searched my rigid posture, looking for arrogance or false bravado. She found only cold, measured competence. The defensive walls she had spent a year building against Vance's psychological warfare began to crack under the weight of my empirical certainty. Apex Solutions Group. LLC, she whispered. Thank you, I said. When does your shift conclude? At 6. I will text you an encrypted address, I told her. Meet me there at 1,900 hours. I will require your contextual knowledge of the loan denial dates to cross-reference the data. I turned and walked down the street, leaving her with a concrete plan instead of empty sympathy. At 1,855 hours, the heavy steel door of my temporary operational facility echoed with 3 sharp knocks. The facility was a rented, climate-controlled warehouse space in an industrial park, housing the initial server racks I had managed to purchase with my startup capital. The room was dark, illuminated only by the blue and green LED status lights of the towering hardware racks. The ambient noise was a continuous, deafening roar of industrial cooling fans moving massive volumes of air. I opened the heavy door. Margot stood on the loading dock, wearing her canvas jacket over her work clothes. She looked entirely out of place in the industrial setting, but she stepped inside without hesitation. I closed the door, engaging the heavy deadbolt, and led her into a secondary, soundproofed glass office built into the corner of the warehouse. The noise dropped instantly to a manageable hum. This is your firm? She asked, looking around at the sparse setup, a massive wooden table holding 3 high-resolution monitors, a mechanical keyboard, and a commercial espresso maker. This is the initial staging ground, I confirmed, pulling a metal folding chair up to the table for her. The capital from the loan was meant to expand the server array to handle concurrent municipal contracts. Margot sat down, placing her bag on the floor. I handed her a mug of black coffee. She took it, the warmth clearly grounding her. I ran a passive DNS and certificate transparency sweep on Apex Solutions Group, I began. sitting in my rolling chair and waking the monitors. The domain is registered behind a privacy proxy in Delaware to mask ownership. However, criminals who utilize shell companies often make critical operational errors regarding digital convenience. I typed a rapid string of commands into a terminal window, bringing up a complex network topology map. Vance didn't want to travel to Delaware to check a physical mailbox or process paper checks, I explained, pointing to a specific cluster of nodes. He set up a hidden administrative dashboard for Apex Solutions to track digital payments from extorted clients. He hosted it on AWS, but he misconfigured the S3 bucket policies. He left the administrative endpoint telemetry exposed to public querying. Can you see his bank accounts? Margot asked, leaning forward, her shoulder brushing my arm. The proximity sent a sudden, uncalculated spike of heat through my rigid posture. I ignored the biological variable and focused strictly on the screen. No. Financial accounts require a federal warrant, I replied, maintaining professional distance. But I do not need his bank accounts. I need his access logs. I opened a secondary window displaying a massive, raw spreadsheet of IP addresses and timestamps. This is a legally obtained, publicly exposed log of the web traffic pinging the Apex Solutions administrative dashboard, I stated. I need you to provide the exact dates and times that Vance denied commercial loans in your office over the last 12 months. Margot set her coffee mug down. Her eyes sharpened, her formidable professional competence clicking perfectly into place. She opened her canvas bag, pulling out a battered, analog leather notebook. I keep a personal, handwritten log of every file he touches, she said, her voice completely stripped of fear. Because I knew one day I would need to defend myself against his altered records, we established an immediate, highly synchronized mechanical loop. It was a profoundly intimate form of collaboration. We were not exchanging emotional dialogue. We were dismantling a threat using sheer, relentless data processing. October 14th. Margot read from her notebook, tracing the line with her finger. Client. Horizon Logistics. Application denied at 1,430 hours. I ran the search algorithm against the exposed telemetry, a device utilizing the Vanguard Regional Bank's primary static IP address accessed the Apex Solutions dashboard at exactly 1,445 hours on October 14th. He was verifying their payment before he executed his manual override. She breathed, realizing the undeniable trap we were building. Give me the next date, I instructed. We worked for 5 continuous hours. By midnight, we had correlated 27 distinct loan denials with immediate, subsequent web traffic originating from Vanguard's internal network. Accessing the illicit dashboard, he is conducting felony extortion during business hours utilizing bank hardware and the bank's internet service provider, I concluded. Saving the hashed, verified data logs onto an external, encrypted drive. This violates a dozen federal compliance laws. The digital chain of custody is absolute. Margot leaned back in her chair, pressing the heels of her hands against her tired eyes. The adrenaline had burned away, leaving a heavy, crushing exhaustion. We have the proof, she whispered. But if we just take this to HR, Vance will execute his threat. He will upload the altered compliance file he holds over my head to the Federal Reserve portal before the bank's internal review board can stop him. He will destroy my license before they fire him. I turned my chair slightly to face her. The stark blue light of the monitors illuminated the rigid, exhausted lines of her face. He cannot execute a threat if he is denied access to the network, I stated, my voice dropping to a low, quiet rumble. She lowered her hands, looking at me. How? He's the senior branch manager. I have compiled a comprehensive whistleblower packet containing the exposed telemetry logs and our cross-referenced timestamps, I explained, pulling up a secure transmission interface. I am going to transmit this dossier simultaneously to the Federal Reserve's Office of the Comptroller of the Currency Oversight Portal and Vanguard's internal Chief Compliance Officer via a secure drop. That will trigger an investigation, she noted, but it won't stop him tomorrow morning. Corporate protocol mandates an immediate, zero-trust lockdown for any employee flagged as a compromised insider by a federal oversight alert, I corrected, hitting the execution key. By 0800 hours tomorrow, corporate IT will execute an automated incident response playbook. They will unilaterally revoke his network credentials, scrub his active sessions, and lock his terminal. He will be entirely severed from the system before he even arrives at the office. He will be structurally paralyzed. Margot stared at the screen as the transmission confirmation flared green. The sheer, overwhelming reality of the strategy settled over her. She looked at me, her eyes searching the rigid, unyielding lines of my face. "You built this entire systemic response tonight," she said softly. "You didn't have to do this. You could have just walked away and found another lender who wasn't corrupt. You are a highly capable operational manager who was trapped in an inefficient, hostile architecture," I replied, maintaining a steady, grounded rhythm to my voice. "I simply engineered a bypass." "Is that all this is to you, Xavier?" she asked, her voice dropping to a fragile, unprotected register. "Just fixing a network error?" I looked down at her hands resting on the metal table. I had spent my entire career analyzing the toxic, superficial greed of corporate executives. I had spent years completely isolated by my own cynical view of human nature. Sitting in this loud, cold server room, surrounded by the physical evidence of her immense, unyielding dedication to her ethics, the isolation finally fractured. "No," I admitted, the single word costing me more effort than the entire 5-hour forensic data trace. I lifted my gaze, meeting her eyes with absolute, radical honesty. The network error was a secondary objective. This task was executed entirely because I respect you, Margot. Because I find your professional integrity to be the most structurally sound asset I have evaluated in a decade. Margot's lips parted. A slow, genuine warmth flooded her exhausted features, completely altering the geometry of her face. She didn't demand a grand, dramatic declaration. She understood the profound weight of the statement. She reached out across the small space. I did not pull away. She placed her hand flat over mine, where it rested near the keyboard. The touch was not hesitant. It was firm, grounding, and completely secure. It was a transfer of trust. "We confront him tomorrow," she whispered fiercely. I turned my hand over, my fingers interlocking with hers, maintaining the physical anchor. "Tomorrow, Friday morning, 1,000 hours." I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Vanguard Regional Branch. I wore my sharpest charcoal suit. I carried my heavy leather briefcase. I did not sit in the waiting area. I walked directly across the lobby toward Vance's corner office. The atmosphere in the bank was remarkably tense. 3 individuals in dark suits, corporate compliance auditors, and an IT security officer were standing near the teller station, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I pushed the glass door to Vance's office open without knocking. Vance was standing behind his desk, frantically smashing the keys on his keyboard. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. The screen of his computer displayed a massive red error message. "Administrative credentials revoked. Incident response protocol initiated." He looked up as I entered, his eyes wide, sweat beading on his forehead. "Martinez," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "What did you do?" "My entire system is locked down. I can't access any client files." "You are experiencing a systemic containment protocol," I stated, my voice echoing loudly against the glass walls, immediately dominating the acoustic space. I walked to the center of the room and placed my briefcase down with a sharp, definitive click. Margot appeared in the doorway behind me. She wore her navy blazer. Her spine was perfectly straight. She did not look like a hostage. She looked like a verified auditor. "Margot," Vance demanded, his voice cracking, desperation bleeding through his aggressive posture. "Call IT. Get my credentials unlocked immediately. I have crucial files to upload to the Fed." "She lacks the authorization to override a federal compliance lockdown," I answered for her, maintaining absolute, dead-eyed contact with him. "What are you talking about?" Vance yelled. I popped the brass latches on my briefcase. I pulled out a thick, bound dossier. I dropped it heavily onto the polished mahogany desk. "Empirical evidence," I replied smoothly. "That dossier contains a certified log of open-source IP telemetry correlating 27 loan denials executed in this office, with immediate, subsequent web traffic to your illicit LLC payment portal. You conducted felony extortion utilizing corporate hardware." Vance stumbled backward, hitting the edge of his credenza. He grabbed the edge of the desk, attempting a final, desperate legal counterattack. "You accessed a private server to get this. That's a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This evidence is inadmissible and legally actionable. You're exposing the bank to massive liability, and I will sue you both into oblivion." I didn't blink. I dismantled his defense with precision. The AWS S3 bucket hosting your telemetry was misconfigured to public access, I countered, my tone dropping to an icy, terrifying whisper. No authentication bypass occurred, rendering the CFAA entirely inapplicable. It is the digital equivalent of leaving your ledger on a public sidewalk. Furthermore, the corporate compliance officers currently standing in the lobby received identical, digitally hashed copies of this dossier via a protected whistleblower channel at 0100 hours this morning. Vance looked through the glass wall. The three corporate suits were now walking purposefully toward his office. He realized his entire career, his leverage, and his legal standing had just evaporated. "You're dead," Vance hissed, turning a venomous glare toward Margot. "I still have the altered contractor file on my local hard drive. I'll hand it over to the auditors right now." "You cannot access your local hard drive," I reminded him, projecting an aura of absolute, immovable dominance. "Your decryption keys were unilaterally revoked by corporate IT. The physical machine will be seized by the compliance team within the minute. The fabricated file is buried under layers of enterprise encryption you can no longer bypass." The glass door opened fully. The lead corporate compliance officer stepped into the room. "Richard Vance," the officer said, his voice devoid of any emotion, holding up a badge. "You are relieved of your duties. Effective immediately. Step away from the terminal. Security will escort you from the building pending a federal inquiry by the OCC." Vance didn't argue. He looked at the dead computer screen, realized the structural facts were completely unassailable, and walked out of the office without a single word. The compliance officer turned to Margot. "Miss Gutierrez, corporate HR requires you to assume acting managerial duties of this branch until a formal review can be conducted. The whistleblower protection protocols are actively safeguarding your license. We apologize for the systemic failure." "I will assume the duties," Margot replied, her voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable clarity. The officers nodded and left the room to follow Vance. The office fell into a profound, suffocating silence. Operational control was completely restored. I closed my briefcase, the sharp click of the latches echoing in the room. "The airspace is locked," I announced softly. "The threat is neutralized." Margot walked around the desk. She did not sit in Vance's chair. She walked directly toward me. The defensive armor she had worn for a year was completely gone. She looked radiant, powerful, and incredibly free. "You completely dismantled him," she said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "You walked into his domain and took apart my worst nightmare in under 4 minutes, using nothing but open-source data. He operated on a flawed psychological premise," I corrected, keeping my hands resting near the handle of my briefcase. "He assumed you were isolated. He failed to account for external network reinforcement. He didn't know I had a digital ghost in my corner," she smiled, stepping closer. The professional, clinical distance between us vanished entirely. She reached out. She didn't shake my hand. She slid her hand down my arm, her fingers intertwining securely with mine. It was a concrete action, a public claim made in the open daylight of the glass office. I froze. The sensory input spiked drastically. My heart rate elevated, a sudden, powerful rhythm drumming against my ribs. I didn't pull away. I allowed the variable to fully process. "The compliance board will manually approve your bridge loan by this afternoon to prevent further litigation regarding the extortion," she noted, her voice dropping its professional edge, replacing it with a quiet, absolute loyalty. "Your capital is secured. My operational requirements are met," I confirmed, my thumb lightly tracing the back of her knuckles. For the first time in years, my heart wasn't racing from the crushing pressure of adrenaline or the fear of a systemic failure. It was racing simply because of the profound presence of the person standing in front of me. "Good," Margot said softly. Her eyes locked onto mine with absolute certainty. "Because my new branch requires a highly competent, permanent, external security auditor. I need someone who knows how to fortify the perimeter." "I am extremely rigorous," I warned her, the rigid walls of my isolation finally, permanently dissolving under her touch. "I prefer rigorous systems," she promised, squeezing my hand tightly. "Your server room needs a structural review tomorrow evening. It's a 2-person job." I looked down at our joined hands, feeling the heavy, cynical weight I had carried for years finally dissipate into the sterile air. I didn't need a perfectly isolated system. I just needed one that was real. "I will secure the facility for your arrival at 1900 hours," I replied. The end.